Hi guys, hope everyone's well and welcome back to the education section. So this video is going to be on rate of gain and is going to be the first instalment of the gaining phase mistake series. So jumping into the episode, where I see people go wrong when it comes to their rate of gain is not having one appropriate for their current position. As we'll get into, your rate of gain will be dependent on many factors, but I see people either gain too fast or too slow. And that basically leads them to not get as much out of the phase they're in than they could potentially do. What I mean by that is maybe they cut themselves short on how much potential muscle they can gain. Or maybe they gain like a decent amount of muscle, but they gain too much body fat that they didn't really need to gain in the process. So you can either be too conservative, too aggressive, and then there's that rough sweet spot around the middle, in my opinion. Just like anything you do, it's about kind of somewhat moderation, and the best place to be somewhere in the middle. Like for example, like how much work you do in the gym. You don't need to do 100 sets. You probably don't need to do one set. The answer is probably somewhere in between. Rate of gain is no different, and each serves their problems. Meaning, gaining too fast can serve its problems. Gaining too slow can serve its problems, as I'll dive into. So, first of all, gaining too fast. What's the potential downsides and problems associated with it? So it can cut the overall amount of runway and time you can spend gaining down. What I mean by that is, if let's say you plan to push your body weight up 30 pounds. Let's say you're starting at 170. You look to push up to 200 pounds. And if you do so, if let's say you gain a pound a week, that's gonna give you 30 weeks of gaining. However, if let's say you gain half a pound a week, then you'll have 60 weeks of gaining. So having, let's say, the 60 weeks of gaining, of course that gives you more time. And time is your best friend when it comes to trying to build muscle tissue. And the more time we can spend in the position where we're building muscle best, in a calorie surplus, the better when it comes to the amount of muscle we can build. And if let's say you take the first option and you gain in half the time, you gain a pound a week and you gain for only 30 weeks instead, then you're going to have more body fat to show for it by the time you're at that body weight, and you're going to have less muscle to show for it, in my opinion. What I mean by that is, of course, we can only build muscle so fast. So if you're gaining a half a pound or a pound a week, you are going to be like that extra half pound you're gaining a pound instead of half a pound, is not going to be half a pound more muscle. Let's be honest, it's going to be half a pound more body fat. So you're better off gaining in a more gradual manner, in my opinion, and it's going to limit the amount of body fat you can gain in that process than if you had that fast rate of gain. And in terms of something else to consider as well is, when you are gaining, if you gain super fast, blood glucose levels will rise. And what this basically means is your level of your blood sugar levels will continuously be elevated if you gain too fast. So that's going to potentially lead to poorer carbohydrate utilization and having a greater likelihood of storing carbohydrates towards body fat instead of muscle mass. And as well as that, having poorer pumps in the gym, not being able to utilize carbohydrates will mean we can't kind of get as good pumps in the gym. We can't shuttle them towards the muscle and utilize them as effectively. And in some extreme cases, other health issues. To be fair, if you are training hard consistently, exercising and eating good foods, probably not going to be as much of a kind of concern as maybe someone else who doesn't. But in some extreme cases, that is an effect of having high resting kind of like blood glucose levels, or continuously elevated blood glucose levels, you could say. So yeah, gaining too fast just simply means you've got less runway to push your body weight up. And like I said, time's your best friend. The more time you can spend in a position to build muscle, the more muscle you can obviously build, of course. So that's why you don't want to gain too fast, because like that extra pound you're gaining is not worth that trade-off, in my opinion. Doing that every single week, it's only going to lead to more body. Let's say you gain out that pound an extra 0.1 pound of muscle, then yes, that's going to be beneficial, but it means you're gaining for half that period, which means you're not able to build muscle for that other half of the time, and you'll have to diet instead, which doesn't put you in a good position to build muscle. So, issues with gaining too slow. So, if you gain too slow, it will just limit the amount of muscle you can gain, and it will basically take you longer to get to a productive body weight to then build muscle. What I mean by that is, if, let's say, my contest prep, for example, I finished at 160 pounds. I didn't really get into a really productive position to kind of perform well until I got to like 175s, around about that, 180, because I was still pretty lean. So to get to a point to actually gain a decent amount of strength and to get to a point where I'm surpassing my previous strength, it took patience. It took quite like a period of waiting until I got my body weight up. So as a result, like, if I just minced around and gained extremely slow at 160 pounds after my prep, then hormonally I probably wouldn't have recovered effectively and been in a good spot, and I wasn't really going to be building much muscle, so I was just spinning my wheels. So you could argue gaining too slow can be detrimental depending on how lean you got. If you aren't super lean, gaining too slow or gaining slower probably isn't an issue. But if you aren't in a good position and in a position where you're able to train productively, then it might be a good idea gaining some weight relatively fast initially and then slowing it down. So, for example, when we're talking about rate of gain doesn't need to apply, like the rate of gain at the start of the diet doesn't need to apply at the very last week of your gaining phase. Or sorry, the rate of gain at the start of your gaining phase doesn't need to apply at the end of your gaining phase. You could most likely be a wee bit faster and then taper off slightly as the need to gain more body weight and the benefit of gaining more body weight kind of dwindles. But like I said, if let's say you aren't in a super lean position where you kind of need more body weight on your frame to perform well and be in a good spot, then you could most likely gain more so like this, slower over time. And in terms of another potential downside of gaining too slow is like a lack of performance increase, and as a result that can affect obviously how much muscle you're building and cause a drop off in motivation. So either of them is not going to be ideal, of course, and the drop in motivation could affect your adherence or your consistency in a negative manner, which is something to consider. And it also maybe potentially prevents you pushing your calorie maintenance up. So if you never kind of visit kind of positions where you're pushing your food up and you're constantly trying to stay lean, then hunger could stay elevated. You won't be able to push your calories up, which means you might psychologically and physically be in a bad position next time you come around to start a diet, because you don't feel like you've had the period of pushing your body weight and you've not had kind of the time spent in a position where you're not hungry, you're not kind of restricting yourself. Because when you start a diet, you want to be mentally fresh. Like if you're starting a diet thinking, I don't even want to look at food, I'm stuffed, that's going to put you in a really good position to then eat less calories and be able to adhere to it. And if, let's say, you do gain slow, of course, a benefit of that is having less body weight to diet off afterwards, which is something to consider, which means a more manageable dieting phase. It's going to be easier to adhere to it. You're going to have less performance drop off. You're going to have less fatigue from dieting as well, which can all be benefits from that. And it means, due to a shorter dieting phase, being able to get into a surplus again sooner. So what should influence rate of gain? What should we consider when we're deciding how fast we should gain body weight? So the time you look to spend gaining for. If you look to spend, let's say you look to spend 6 months gaining, that's going to maybe be different than if, let's say, you are willing to spend a year gaining, or if you're spending 3 months gaining, because it depends what you're dieting down for, what your goal weight is, etc. So how long you look to spend gaining for. However, this might influence how slow you gain, but it might not influence how fast you gain. What I mean by that is, if someone's like saying, "Oh, I want a diet down in 3 months' time," then I'm not going to push them up 30 pounds in 3 months. That's ridiculous. It's just going to lead them to gain unnecessarily but amounts of body fat. Whereas I might get someone to gain slower for a certain reason. For example, if let's say it's November, we're not wanting to diet just yet, so I want to draw the gaining phase out until after December, then what I'll basically do is just take it nice and gradual, so we don't gain too much body fat in January, if that makes sense, or by the time it's January. So if, let's say, you gain slower, then it means we can draw that gaining phase out a wee bit longer, so we're not starting in an awkward period of the year and then still be in a surplus, still be in a good position to perform, but not gain too much body fat. So that's when you can maybe opt for a really slow rate of gain, just at the very end of the gaining phase, when you don't need to gain much more to leverage good performance. Another reason is performance. Performance should kind of influence rate of gain. So like I said, after my contest prep, it was good for me to kind of gain a wee bit more aggressively so that I can push my performance up and build new muscle tissue. Because if, let's say, I gained ridiculously slow after my contest prep, I'm just wasting time. I'm in a position where I'm not going to build muscle, so it makes sense being a bit faster out the gate until I'm performing well and then being slower. Thank you very much for watching the video. The full video is available for my online coaching clients in the Coach by Charlie education section. If you are interested in online coaching or where else you can find me, please feel free to have a look at the links in the description. And lastly, if you did enjoy the video, any support is greatly appreciated, so drop me a like, comment what you enjoyed about it, and lastly, subscribe for more content from myself.